On a cold January morning in 1931, a groundskeeper named James Stark made his usual walk across a sprawling estate outside Atlanta. Thick Georgia fog hovered low over the putting green, swallowing the distance and turning the landscape into something blurred and unnaturally quiet. Stark had walked these grounds so many times, he could have done it without looking. And that familiarity is what made the next detail feel so wrong. A car was parked where no car should have been, angled strangely, too still, too deliberate for a place built on order and routine. At first, he assumed it belonged to someone from nearby Emory College, whose faculty were allowed to stroll the property. But as he drew closer, the chill that moved through him had nothing to do with the winter air. Inside the vehicle sat two bodies, a young man and a young woman, both dead from gunshot wounds. The man's hand rested near an ivory-handled pistol, an elegant weapon that looked expensive even in the dim light. Stark recognized it instantly because it belonged to his employer. That employer was Asa Griggs Candler Jr., heir to the Coca-Cola fortune. Behind the fog loomed Briercliffe, a 42-acre estate built as a monument to wealth, ambition, and one man's desperate desire to be remembered. In the hours that followed, the city closed in. Reporters gathered, officials documented evidence, and Atlanta's elite whispered behind drawn curtains. But the deeper truth was simpler and darker. From that morning forward, Briercliffe would never be just an estate again. It would become a stain that could be renovated, repainted, and rebranded, but never fully erased. When death arrives at a place designed for spectacle, it does not simply pass through. It settles in and becomes part of the structure itself. To understand how a Coca-Cola Heir's pistol ended up in the hand of a dead man on the edge of a private putting green, the story must go back further than the fog and further than the mansion, back to the dusty roads of rural Georgia, to a time when the Candler name was not yet a symbol of American power and Coca-Cola was not yet a global promise. The story of Briercliffe begins not with marble fireplaces and gold leaf walls, but with a pharmacist, a peculiar brown syrup, and a quiet hunger that would grow until it could swallow a city. Asa Griggs Candler was born in 1851 in Villa Rica, Georgia. Raised in a world shaped by cotton fields, church pews, and the rigid logic of work, his family had prosperity, the kind that seemed solid until history decided otherwise. The Civil War and its aftermath reshaped the South, leaving a wounded region determined to rebuild while clinging to old hierarchies. Candler did not dream of mansions or celebrity. He dreamed of medicine. And in the late 19th century, medicine and business were often the same thing. He became a pharmacist and moved to Atlanta in 1873, arriving in a city still healing from war and burning with reinvention. For 15 years, he built a respectable business selling patent medicines, learning a lesson that would become his greatest weapon. People do not buy products because they are rational. They buy because they want to believe, because they want relief, hope, comfort, and belonging. In 1888, a pharmacist named John Stith Pemberton came to Candler with an unusual proposition. Pemberton had invented a sweet, carbonated tonic called Coca-Cola, but he was ill and struggling financially, and he needed to sell his creation. For a sum often described as around $2,300, Candler purchased the formula that would make his family one of the wealthiest in America. What mattered was not just how the drink tasted, but what Candler saw in it, He saw a ritual, something that could move through America like a new kind of religion. He attacked marketing with evangelical intensity, giving away free samples, plastering the Coca-Cola name on calendars and clocks, and pushing salesmen to spread the gospel of refreshment everywhere. He understood that if you could attach a feeling to a product, you could sell it forever. By 1895, Coca-Cola was sold in every state and territory in the United States. In just 7 years, a local tonic became a national presence, and Asa Candler became a millionaire many times over. He diversified into banking and real estate, built the Candler Building in downtown Atlanta, and helped develop Druid Hills into one of the South's most desirable neighborhoods. He donated millions to establish Emory University, tying his family name to education and public good, turning money into legacy. In 1916, he was elected mayor of Atlanta and led the city through the Great Fire of 1917 that destroyed more than 1,500 homes. To the public, he looked like a builder, a benefactor, a disciplined force shaping Atlanta's future. But empires come with costs, and not every cost appears on a balance sheet. Inside the family, money did not erase human complexity. It amplified it. It created pressure, competition, expectation, and a quiet violence that comes from living under a name heavier than your own identity. Among Asa Candler's children, one son would become the contradiction of the family myth, proof that wealth can build almost everything except peace. That son was Asa Griggs Candler Jr., known to most as Buddy. Buddy was born in 1880, the second of 5 children, and the namesake of his increasingly famous father. From the beginning, he did not fit the polished image the family wanted. Where his older brother Charles was studious and responsible, Buddy was restless and impulsive. He struggled in school, could not sit still in church, and resisted rules that did not interest him. Today, people might reach for diagnoses and explanations. In his era, wealthy families reached for distance. In 1888, the same year his father purchased the Coca-Cola formula, 8-year-old Buddy was sent away to his Aunt Florence's school in Cartersville, Georgia. It was an all-girls school, which revealed how desperate his parents were to find any institution that would take him, and how urgently they wanted to remove the problem from sight. His aunt and uncle tried to straighten him out, but Buddy remained Buddy, charming, energetic, easily captivated, and just as easily distracted. When he later attended Emory College, he did not distinguish himself academically. One of his classmates was Alben Barkley, who would become Vice President of the United States. But Buddy's mind was elsewhere. He was fascinated by automobiles, speed, and machines that promised freedom from society's slow expectations. Cars represented the future, and Buddy wanted the future because the present felt like confinement. After college, his father sent him west to help establish Coca-Cola bottling plants, hoping responsibility would mature him. It only partially worked. He could focus when something captured his imagination, but his imagination wandered constantly. In 1905, he married Helen McGill, the cultured and graceful daughter of a Georgia newspaper editor, praised in local papers for impeccable taste and elegant gowns. Helen was everything Atlanta society admired, and for a time it seemed Buddy might settle into a respectable life. Then their infant son died, and something inside him cracked open. Grief does not always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like motion. Buddy threw himself into work with manic intensity, launching ambitious project after ambitious project as if speed itself could outrun grief. In 1909, he unveiled the Atlanta Speedway, a 2-mile racing track designed to be the finest in the South. For 2 years, racing celebrities flocked to the city, and Buddy even competed as an amateur driver. But the track never turned a profit. By 1911, just 2 years after opening, the Speedway shut down permanently. Even in failure, the venture left a strange and lasting legacy. The land became Candler Field, an airstrip that would eventually grow into Hartsfield, Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Buddy had accidentally helped create one of the busiest airports in the world. It became a pattern that would follow him throughout his life. His grand visions could reshape history, but they rarely created stability. They were flashes of brilliance, not foundations. In 1910, while the Speedway still operated, Buddy purchased a rundown farmhouse on 40, 2 acres along Williams Mill Road, just north of his brother Charles's estate, Callanwald. The property was known as Briercliffe Farm, and at first he treated it like a working farm. He raised cows, sheep, pigs, and chickens, selling produce and dairy to local retailers. He modernized the operation with electric lights and fans in the barns, even installing individual drinking fountains for cows. Agricultural experts praised its cleanliness and efficiency, and during World War I, Briercliffe supplied milk to Fort Gordon. For a moment, the place looked productive and respectable. But Buddy never wanted it to be admired for being sensible. He wanted to be remembered for being extraordinary. The year 1916 reshaped the Candler family. Asa Candler became mayor of Atlanta, and to avoid any appearance of conflict of interest, he transferred control of the Coca-Cola Company to his children while he was still alive. Each child received a fortune worth millions. Family lore claimed Buddy received the smallest share, with his father deducting debts that may have totaled around $100,000. The detail revealed how the family viewed him. Even as they gave him wealth, they measured him as a risk. In 1919, the Candler children made a decision that shattered the family myth. They agreed to sell Coca-Cola to a group led by Ernest Woodruff for $25 million. Whether Asa Candler was furious or quietly resigned, the result was the same. Buddy suddenly had more money than he could ever spend, and restraint was never part of his character. Flush with cash, he turned his attention to Briercliffe Farm, imagining not just a home, but a statement meant to prove to everyone, especially his more respectable older brother, that Asa Candler Jr. mattered. Construction began in 1920. Buddy hired architect C.E. Fraser, with Dan Bowden assisting, and they designed a Georgian Revival mansion, the architectural language of tradition and respectability. But the scale was anything but restrained. When completed in 1922, Briercliffe contained more than 40 rooms, including 7 bedrooms and 10 bathrooms, multiple solariums, a grand library with hand-carved wood paneling, and a third-floor ballroom with 14-foot ceilings painted in gold leaf. Newspapers reported staggering costs that sounded absurd even in an era of excess. Buddy demanded marble fireplaces in bedrooms, coffered ceilings, intricate moldings, terrace gardens, and greenhouses filled with exotic plants. He wanted 2 swimming pools, one for the family, and one later open to the public with a Coca-Cola stand, surrounded by landscaped grounds that felt like a luxury resort. This was not domestic comfort. It was spectacle carved into stone. Luxury was common among wealthy Atlanta families, but Buddy wanted wonder. He wanted the estate to feel like a place where ordinary rules did not apply. In 1925, he commissioned a massive addition, a 3-story music room with richly carved oak panels and a towering limestone fireplace. The room became known as Dova's Hall, and at its center stood his ultimate statement of excess, an aeolian pipe organ so enormous it rivaled cathedral instruments. It cost $94,000 and featured 8 ranks and 187 stops. Reportedly the largest privately owned organ in Georgia. His father owned an organ. His brother owned one too. Buddy's had to be bigger. At Briercliffe, even beauty had to compete. Concerts in the music room were broadcast on radio station WSB, turning Buddy's private indulgence into public performance. Briercliffe continued expanding into what newspapers called 40 acres of fairyland. Buddy built servants' quarters, a carriage house with staff apartments, tennis courts, stables, kennels, and gardens filled with fountains, statuary, and exotic plants imported from around the world. He created a private golf course and putting green, blurring the line between home and spectacle, because that blur was the point. He did not want quiet old money. He wanted a stage where the world could judge him. Then, Buddy did something that even Atlanta's wealthy found hard to believe. He built a zoo. The private menagerie at Briercliffe became legendary. He acquired animals from around the world, possibly from a struggling European circus he encountered during his travels. There were elephants, 4 of them named Coca-Cola, refreshing and delicious, because Buddy loved turning his father's corporate legacy into personal theater. There was a Bengal tiger, a black leopard, lions, bears, exotic birds, a gorilla, and a baboon that would later become infamous. Neighbors complained for years about noise and smell, but Buddy's wealth insulated him from their concerns. When you have enough money, other people's discomfort becomes background noise. In 1935, the baboon escaped and wandered onto a neighboring property, terrifying a woman who lived there. The baboon bit her, stole her purse, and destroyed $60 in cash, a detail newspapers loved. She sued Buddy and won $10,000 in damages, a massive sum at the time. The lawsuit forced him to close the zoo. He donated the animals and funds for their care to Grant Park Zoo, which later became Zoo Atlanta. For the city, it was a bizarre scandal. For Buddy, it was a humiliation. Another reminder that his fairyland could not stay contained. Before the zoo closed, and before darker events would stain the estate, Briercliffe was the center of Atlanta's social universe. Buddy and Helen Candler hosted legendary parties, attended by politicians, celebrities, writers, and artists. The estate became a place people talked about, even if they had never been invited, because knowing about it made them feel closer to power. Observers noticed the resemblance to a fictional figure capturing the American imagination at the time. Buddy's restless energy, extravagant architecture, and desperate hunger for recognition made him feel like Atlanta's own Great Gatsby. But unlike fiction, Buddy's tragedy was real. Helen Candler, the gracious hostess who stood beside him through schemes and scandals, died in January 1927 at just 40 years old. Atlanta newspapers praised her as a civic leader, and her funeral was officiated by Buddy's uncle, Bishop Warren Akin Candler. She was buried at Westview Cemetery, in a plot Buddy would obsessively design and expand for years. Her death did not quiet him. It accelerated him. he clung harder to distractions, to spectacle, to anything that could interrupt the reality of loss. 9 months after Helen's death, Buddy remarried. His new wife was Florence Adeline Stevenson, a widow who had worked as his secretary for 9 years. The speed of the marriage raised eyebrows in Atlanta society. But Buddy had never been guided by public opinion. With Florence beside him, he leaned into a new obsession. He had always been drawn to illusion, to magic, to the seductive idea that reality itself could be bent if you had the right tools. In the late 1920s, Buddy's fascination with magic became all-consuming. He began collecting magical apparatus with the same intensity he once devoted to racing cars and exotic animals. He filled the third-floor ballroom with trick boxes, disappearing cabinets, stage props, and intricate devices built to deceive the eye. Briercliffe, already unusual, became even stranger. High society gathered beneath gold, leaf ceilings to watch impossible things happen. Champagne glasses catching chandelier light, while a wealthy man chased wonder, as if wonder could replace happiness. Buddy flew famous magicians into Atlanta on his private airplane. Names like Harry Blackstone circulated in conversation, and Buddy claimed friendship with Harry Houdini, whether or not Houdini ever set foot in Briercliffe. The truth mattered less than the myth. Buddy lived on myth because myth was the only currency that could compete with his father's legacy. Then Buddy met a young man who would bring his passion for illusion to a tragic end. During a trip to the Philippines, he encountered a talented magician named Cruz. The young performer was skilled, charismatic, and hungry for opportunity. Buddy was enchanted and invited to Atlanta to live at Briercliffe as his personal magic tutor and butler. Accepted. In April 1925, the 24-year-old Filipino magician arrived in San Francisco aboard the SS President Taft with his younger brother and another companion. They traveled to Atlanta and moved into an apartment above the garage at Briercliffe. For several years, Joe's became central to life at the mansion. He taught Buddy tricks, organized magic parties, and helped stage elaborate shows. The third-floor ballroom became a theater, complete with a secret door likely used for disappearing acts. Briercliffe became a place where reality felt flexible, where a wealthy man's whims could summon elephants and make objects vanish, where the line between entertainment and obsession dissolved. But Joe's carried his own life, his own secrets, and eventually his own darkness. In the months leading up to January 1931, Joe's began seeing a young woman named Gladys Fricks. Their relationship troubled her family. Some accounts suggest disapproval of Joe's background, while others hint at deeper fears. Friends later said Gladys seemed happy and sought his company, and on the night of January 17, she went out with him willingly. That night, the couple drove to the southern edge of the Briercliffe estate near the Pudding Green. In the quiet darkness of the private property, something terrible happened. When groundskeeper James Stark found the car the next morning, Cruz was slumped in the driver's seat with a gunshot wound to his temple. Gladys Fricks lay across him, dead from a gunshot wound to her abdomen. A note suggested a double suicide born of forbidden love, but investigators quickly noticed details that did not fit. The note appeared written as if by a woman, yet the handwriting matched Joe's. Only one empty cartridge was found, though 2 people were dead, and the ivory-handled pistol belonged to Asa Griggs Candler Jr. A coroner's jury convened, that afternoon and reached a verdict that shattered the romantic narrative. They concluded that Cruz murdered Gladys Fricks and then killed himself. Newspapers photographed the ivory-handled pistol and a pearl-handled dagger found in the car, and the story dominated headlines across Atlanta. Briercliffe was suddenly known for something darker than parties and exotic animals. It became a symbol of betrayal, violence, and the collapse of a glamorous illusion into something ugly and real. Buddy was not implicated in the deaths. There was no evidence he knew Joe's had taken the gun, and investigators found nothing connecting him to the act beyond ownership of the weapon. Still, the scandal tainted everything. The magic parties stopped. The ballroom fell silent. The estate built to impress Atlanta now disgusted it. Buddy, already struggling with grief, withdrew further into himself. The mansion built for joy began its long descent into shadow. The 1930s arrived like a cold wind through Georgia pines. The stock market crash of 1929 ended the golden age of easy excess, and even the wealthy felt the chill. Buddy's father died in 1929, leaving behind a complicated legacy. Without Asa Candler's steady presence, the family myth became harder to maintain, and Buddy's life harder to hide. His drinking worsened after Helen's death, and friends noticed the tremor in his hands. Florence tried to manage both her husband and the estate, but Briercliffe was a machine that consumed money and energy every day it stood. The zoo was gone, donated to Grant Park after the baboon scandal. The magic equipment gathered dust. The mansion's enormous rooms echoed with fewer footsteps. Yet Buddy still needed something that felt like control, and strangely, what kept him moving was death. For more than 20 years, he had been involved in running Westview Cemetery, and he threw himself into it with obsessive intensity. He oversaw construction of one of the largest community mausoleums in the world and designed pathways and monuments with the same precision he once applied to Briercliffe's grounds. He became fixated on designing his own mausoleum, refining its details, as if planning the perfect tomb could correct the failures of life. In the late 1930s, Buddy made a surprising decision and stopped drinking. The man everyone expected to drink himself into an early grave put down the bottle and stayed sober for the rest of his life. Sobriety, however, could not save Briercliffe. The estate's problem was not just Buddy's habits. The fortune that seemed endless in 1919 was not endless at all. His ventures produced more failures than successes, and the cost of maintaining 42 acres of fantasy was astronomical. The mansion required constant care. Staff wages, repairs, taxes, landscaping, utilities, and the endless quiet expense of keeping a dream alive drained money faster than Buddy could replace it. By the end of the 1940s, the writing was on the wall. The fairy tale castle had become an albatross. The grand rooms that once hosted glamour now felt like mockery. The pool still glittered under the Georgia sun, but the crowds had thinned. The city had moved on, and Buddy was growing older, watching his world shrink around him. By 1948, the inevitable could no longer be avoided. He was forced to sell Briercliffe. The buyer was the federal government, specifically the General Services Administration, which planned to convert the estate into a veterans' hospital for soldiers returning from World War II. There was a fitting irony in the decision. The house built for excess was to be repurposed for those who had sacrificed everything. The irony did not comfort Buddy. He reportedly received far less than the mansion was worth. A final indignity for a man who had spent his life trying to appear invincible. The Veterans Hospital never materialized. Plans stalled, budgets shifted, and Briercliffe sat empty while bureaucrats debated its fate. Buddy and Florence moved out of the mansion they had called home for decades and relocated to the top floor of the Briercliffe Hotel, a building Buddy himself had developed in 1924 at the corner of Ponce de Leon Avenue and North Highland Avenue. It was comfortable, but it was not the castle on the hill. It was not the world he built to prove his worth. It was a quiet admission that even a Coca-Cola Heir could run out of illusions. For the next 5 years, Buddy lived in that penthouse surrounded by memory. He continued his work at Westview Cemetery, refining the design of his mausoleum, as if sculpting the perfect resting place could deliver the dignity his living life often lacked. He had spent years planning his final exit, and now the end was approaching whether he wanted it or not. On January 11, 1953, Asa Griggs Candler Jr. died of liver cancer at the age of 72. Newspapers that once chronicled his elephants, parties, and scandals printed brief obituaries. A family friend reportedly said, "Buddy didn't do anything small." The line captured him perfectly. He was a man of grand gestures, spectacular failures, and occasional triumphs. His greatest monument was not the speedway that became an airport or the hotel that still stood. It was Briercliffe, the place that outlived him and continued to collect new meanings long after his name began to fade. If Buddy believed death ended the story, Briercliffe proved him wrong almost immediately. In 1953, the same year he died, the estate found a new purpose. It became the Georgian Clinic, the first alcohol rehabilitation facility in Georgia. The irony was brutal. The mansion built by a man who struggled with drinking was now dedicated to helping others escape addiction. The grand rooms where champagne once flowed became treatment spaces. Terraces where socialites once strolled became grounds for patients learning to live one day at a time. For a while, the pools remained open as part of therapy. Then budget constraints closed that chapter. The pools were drained, covered, and gradually forgotten, becoming another buried relic of the estate's extravagant past. The addiction center evolved and was eventually known as the DeKalb County Addiction Center. The estate's most dramatic transformation was still to come. In 1965, the state of Georgia built the Georgia Mental Health Institute on the property. A massive multi-story tower rose on the grounds, a stark modernist structure that clashed with Buddy's Georgian Revival mansion. Smaller buildings were arranged in a semicircle, connected by underground tunnels. On paper, the tunnels were practical, allowing staff to move patients between buildings and keep them out of public view. In reality, concrete corridors beneath a decaying mansion lit by bare bulbs cast long shadows and fueled decades of rumors. Briercliffe had once been a place of illusion with secret doors and theatrical tricks. Now it had secret passages for institutional reasons, carrying a psychological weight no renovation could erase. For 32 years, from 1965 to 1997, the Georgia Mental Health Institute operated on the grounds. The original mansion was absorbed into the facility. Elegant rooms were subdivided. Drop ceilings hid ornate plasterwork. Institutional flooring covered hardwood. And fluorescent lighting replaced warmth. Dove's Hall was repurposed, and the great organ was eventually removed, leaving only its console. The third-floor ballroom became nurses' dormitories. Secret doors were sealed or forgotten. Marble fireplaces gathered dust under layers of paint. Layer by layer, Buddy's fairyland disappeared beneath bureaucracy and necessity. Thousands of patients passed through those buildings. Some came voluntarily seeking help. Others were committed against their will. The mansion absorbed their stories, their suffering, their recoveries, their breakdowns, and their quiet moments of hope. The estate, built as a monument to one man's ego, became a place defined by human fragility. When the hospital closed in 1997, it left behind empty buildings and stories. Stories turned the abandoned property into a myth. Rumors spread almost immediately. People whispered about sounds in the mansion, flickering lights, and figures seen at night. The tunnels became objects of fascination, feeding speculation about what happened out of sight. Graffiti appeared, trespassers broke in, and myths grew. One message scrawled on an indoor fountain read, "It ran with blood." Whether it was a prank or a reflection of pain, it attached emotion to the place, and emotion lasts longer than fact. In 1998, Emory University purchased the property, a poetic return given Asa Candler Jr.'s role in establishing the university. Emory faced a difficult reality. The mansion was in terrible condition, with leaks, water damage, and mold. Restoration would cost millions, money difficult to justify without a clear purpose. The university secured the site and waited as the mansion decayed. Meanwhile, the abandoned mental hospital tower attracted attention from filmmakers. In 2016, the Netflix series Stranger Things used the facility as the exterior of Hawkins National Laboratory, drawing fans from around the world who often missed the hidden mansion behind the trees. Preservation advocates grew alarmed. A local supporter, Charlie Payne, campaigned to save Briercliffe, arguing it was a crucial piece of Atlanta's history. The mansion had been listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1988, but recognition did not bring funding. Without significant investment, advocates warned it would be lost forever. An urban explorer and writer, Sarah Butler, became fascinated with the mansion in the 2010s. She researched Buddy Candler's life, the zoo, the organ, the parties, and the deaths on the Pudding Green. She traced remnants of the zoo and documented the estate's history, refusing to let the story disappear. In the public imagination, Buddy often existed as a punchline, but his legacy was more complex. He was visionary and reckless, brilliant in bursts and unstable in execution. The airport, Zoo Atlanta, and several buildings traced back to his ventures, but Briercliffe remained his most personal creation, and the clearest proof that money can build spectacle, but not peace. For years, the mansion existed in a suspended state, too valuable to demolish, too expensive to restore, too historic to ignore. In 2022, hope arrived. Emory announced a long-term ground lease with Gallery, Living to build a luxury senior living community and restore the mansion. Plans included repairing the roof, reversing water damage, restoring carved paneling, marble fireplaces, and coffered ceilings, and reopening the mansion as an event space. Before restoration began, historians and journalists toured the decayed mansion. Chandeliers lay fallen, mold-covered surfaces, and dust-filled hallways, yet the bones of Buddy's dream remained visible. Arched doorways, stonework, and grand proportions still hinted at past splendor. Standing in those damaged rooms made it easy to imagine the thundering organ, the parties, and the laughter of a man trying to drown grief with spectacle. Briercliffe's story is not simply about a rich man and a ruined mansion. It is about how buildings outlive their builders and collect every story within their walls. Buddy built Briercliffe to be remembered, filled it with wonders, and tried to turn excess into immortality. History transformed it into something else. It became a crime scene, a rehabilitation clinic, a mental health campus, an abandoned myth, a pop culture landmark, and a restoration project. It became proof that no amount of money can control the meaning a place will gather over time. The story returns to that cold January morning in 1931 when James Stark walked into the fog and found a car parked wrong on a private estate. In that moment, Briercliffe stopped being only Buddy's dream and became a public story. The estate had been touched by something that did not care about wealth or names. Briercliffe stands as a monument to ambition and excess, tragedy and resilience, and the strange way history reshapes grand gestures into unintended legacies. The man who built it has been dead for decades. The woman he loved lies in a cemetery he helped shape. The magician's story has faded into whispers. The estate has been many things and continues to change, waiting for new chapters to be written into its walls. If you know where to look, you can still picture the Georgian Revival towers rising above the trees, the shape of a dream made real in stone, and understand that Briercliffe is the dark story of Coca-Cola's forgotten mansion, a tale of fortune and folly, spectacle and decay. And the truth that buildings remember everything, even what their owners never wanted the world to see.